Hello Indie Game fans, it's another massive week of new releases with 31 titles of interest, so let's begin with Realm of Ink, an action roguelike title with an art style inspired by calligraphy and ink and a theme based on Chinese mythology. Our heroine, the swordswoman named Red, realizes that she is a character in a book and her fate is predetermined, now wanting to break free to unveil the truth of her own existence, looking absolutely gorgeous and does look kind of like Hades, so of course I'm interested in this. Pretty good start to the week, and we are only 2 games in since we also have the release of Echo Point Nova, an open-world first-person shooter taking place in floating islands in the sky. This game is all about speed and traversal, where soaring through the air to pull off a sick headshot looks awesome, and the best part is that it is open-world and has a map as well, so you can jump from one island to the next. It looks very ambitious, but doesn't seem to be overly bogged down by different systems like a Far Cry for example, instead just being shooting focused, and comes to us from the developer of Severed Steel, which is great, which just so happens to be 90% off until October 1st, so go get that as well. This video is brought to you by NEODUEL Backpack Monsters, an asynchronous PvP auto-battler with both inventory management and a monster taming twist. You are assembling a party of monsters, known as Cosmians, and placing them in your backpack, rotating and optimizing their position in relation to everything else in order to maximize their effectiveness. Of course, with these being monsters, they can be evolved using crystals and can even fuse into a more powerful form. Battle other players asynchronously and fight your way up the rankings, going from the humble streets to mega stadiums. If you're not familiar, how this subgenre works is that player-created teams, including your own, are saved to storage, which can then be randomly drawn when another player engages with the game. So every opponent that you battle in-game actually had a real-life person creating said loadout, and has been proven to be a tried and tested formula. I grew up with Pokemon, so of course the monster taming aspect appeals to me, mainly because I want to see all the monster designs, so the evolution and fusion systems in particular sparked my curiosity. This releases soon on September 30th, 2024, so check out the demo on Steam, wishlist the game, and buy it when it releases via the link in the description below. Initially announced on April Fool's Day, DUCKSIDE is no joke, since through the multiple playtests that it has conducted, it has gained a pretty huge following, so let's see if that transfers into its early access launch. When I first saw this game, I immediately thought PUBG but with ducks, and then there's also a Fortnite style building system, but then you realize that this is not a battle royale title at all. Rather, it is a survival game with both PvP and PvE elements like Rust but with ducks, having very video game stuff in this, since the wielding of tools and guns is not rigged to the duck's wing, but rather simply floats in the air. Now maybe these are psychic ducks or something that are using telekinesis, or maybe it doesn't matter at all since it is a video game, but for being clever, this gets a mention. Love indie games? Sign up to my newsletter to get a weekly dose of what's hot, along with some news and of course, weekly game giveaways, so if interested, link is in the description below.
It's been about a week now, and the odds have turned. Warsaw is slowly turning into ruins, as the Germans are fighting hard, with everything they have to stop the uprising.
Ever since the shutdown of Mimimi Games, developer of Shadow Tactics, Blades of the Shogun, Desperados 3, and Shadow Gambit The Cursed Crew, there have been a number of developers trying to take the mantle of the real-time tactics genre, making games from an isometric camera angle with stealth and with real-time action, such as the recently released Sumerian 6, with another title of interest being 63 Days. This is a World War II themed game set during the 63 days of the Warsaw Uprising in 1944 as you fight for your life. In addition to stealth action, There are also vehicles and tanks involved, which I presume you will need to outsmart, and visually looks pretty good for a game in 2024. Here's a game with an awesome throwback art style named Zero Protocol, a thriller, horror, sci-fi first-person shooter in which you are exploring the IAS Antarctic Research Complex in search of answers. The developers cite games like Zero Tolerance, System Shock and Half-Life as inspirations of more gloomy first-person shooters where you can feel quite vulnerable, especially since there are monsters and enemies lurking in the dark, some of which cannot be killed by your bullets. There are survival horror elements like finding key items or passwords to unlock doors, and interestingly has a non-linear storyline as well, so I wonder how that will play out. The driving game renaissance continues with #DriveRally, an arcade racer all about rally racing, which is supposed to be based on some iconic real-world rally racing locations. Now, I'm not a motorsports fan, although I do like the occasional driving game and this looks neat, having characters known as co-drivers which you can choose from to assist you, and adds a little bit of personality to the game, with it having a great visual style as well. One of the recent standout city builders is Against the Storm, one that adds a survival element in a world of endless rain, which naturally leads to the possibility of game over and thus the roguelite structure of the game. It has an astounding almost 24,000 Steam reviews as of recording, which means a huge player base, so the release of the Keepers of the Stone paid DLC makes sense, adding a new race of frog people who are experts in stone masonry and rain punk. There's a new biome, buildings, abilities, cornerstones and more, and looks like a worthy addition to a fantastic game. Don't sleep on Alruna and the Necro-Industrialists this week, an 8-bit pixel art Metroidvania that self-describes as being compact and high density, having some essential elements that modern fans of Metroidvanias may not be aware of, since it allows you to sequence break and play out of order if you know how to, and is the hidden gem of the week. I have to be the bearer of bad news, since I'm unhappy to inform you of the release of Balatro on mobile, the poker roguelite deck builder that is one of the frontrunners for Indie Game of the Year, being horribly compelling to the extent of consuming all your time. Yes, it is that good and really should come with some sort of warning label, where personally, I will not be getting this since I have stuff to do and also don't prefer to play games on my phone, but no judgment if you're planning on getting this since it will be awfully convenient. Hippity hoppity, your time is my property indeed, Mr. Local Thunk. Here's a creepy looking survival sandbox title named City 20, one that isn't the most impressive visually, but has an interesting setting of a city that was quarantined after a radioactive leak and was left to starve. As an inhabitant of said city, you need to find a way to survive, of having to establish relationships with the different factions and exploring, farming, hunting, crafting and building your base. NPCs have their own motivations and will react to your actions, so there is some form of simulation here, looking like quite the bleak survival experience and could be neat. An awesome looking deck builder RPG is named DUCKSIDE, having one key aspect that might make some of you very happy, since this is not a roguelite, rather being a narratively driven turn-based RPG instead, so something along the lines of SteamWorld Quest instead of Slay the Spire. A mysterious force has been pulling ships out of the sky, causing them to crash on the planet, so your misfit crew has to solve the mystery and to fight their way through. I think that the art style looks neat, with characters that feel differentiated due to their designs and abilities, with perhaps the non-roguelite structure of the game giving you more time to digest and understand the deck building mechanics, and should be good as well. Duck Entertainment is one of the more interesting indie developers since, for whatever reason, their games have a very old school look to them, with their earliest release on Steam dating back to 2008, so this is a very experienced developer who has been in the game for a long time, and their next title is Din's Champion. this is a side-scrolling action platformer with crafting and base building elements, so maybe a Terraria-like title, but with more RPG mechanics like attributes, character classes, and more. Again, it is not the most visually impressive, but could be neat, so whether you're a long-time fan of the developer or not, maybe give this a chance. We also have the release of Dungeon Tycoon, a game that sure looks like Dungeon Keeper, but voxel to me, which is not necessarily a bad thing, since lots of people have a large amount of nostalgia for that game, and we could use a good modern one of these. You are constructing your own evil dungeon, stuffing it full of traps, monsters, and treasure to tempt heroes to come claim it, but of course, your objective is for them to be unsuccessful, but not to the extent of killing them, since you are running a business after all and want them to come back. As such, it's a little bit sanded off in terms of the whole evil dungeon overlord thing, but I suppose might have a wider, more family-friendly appeal and looks to be a good Tycoon game. A not-so-indie title is Earth Defense Force World Brothers 2, the voxel version of the, some would say, mindless and kind of janky Earth Defense Force games, trading in the polygonal models for voxels and looks alright here. It's more of the same fighting giant enemies to save the world kind of story, but that, I suppose, is the appeal of the series, allowing you some mindless fun while also being great in co-op, with World Brothers 1 being well received, so hopefully this scratches that same itch. Developer Fun Selector love their motorsports, having made games all about driving such as Absolute Drift and Art of Rally, and now are releasing Golden Lap this week. Instead of directly controlling the car, this is a motorsports management game instead, where you play as the manager of the team and want to win a championship. That means hiring the right crew members, R&D on the cars, making critical decisions on race day, while still accomplishing the goals of your sponsors in order to keep everyone happy. It is very minimalist in presentation, but there's a charm to this game, and given that the Singapore Grand Prix was just yesterday, of course I have to give this a mention. French developer Spiders has the B game developer moniker since the titles that they make, like the Technomancer, Steel Rising, and the original GreedFall, have interesting ideas but tend to be a little janky in execution, but each game does have their own loyal following of fans, flaws and all, which is why GreedFall 2 The Dying World is of interest. This is an open world RPG with real-time action, but you can trigger a tactical pause in combat to use items or activate special abilities, and does look kind of old school in design of RPGs dating back to the 2000s. This is actually a prequel set 3 years before the first game, although you are playing as a fully customizable character, so it's more to do with the overall lore and setting of the series and should be decent. If you enjoy the Pokemon trading card game, a title to watch will be Owls of Swaps, a roguelite deck builder that is not a Slay the Spire-like, but rather takes inspiration from competitive trading card games instead. That means building an economy through gathering energy so that you can play stronger cards where placement on the battlefield matters, along with an elemental system that looks similar to Pokemon, with an adorable look as well as the setting of a playground where kids are competing to become Critter Champion and looks good. I mentioned in a couple of recent videos how nothing is ever truly dead in the world of video games, since you can get spiritual successors, actual sequels, remakes, and remasters of virtually any game that was ever made, and that is the case with Night Slasher's remake this week as well. The original is from 1993, so that's 31 years ago, being a well-received horror-themed beat-em-up game in which you are battling zombies, werewolves, and other supernatural horror creatures. New in this remake is the addition of a 4th playable character and 4-player co-op support, and looks alright. Inspired by a viral Reddit post,
Tale might be pure fiction, or that's your story we need.
Inspired by a viral Reddit post, Pineapple: A Bittersweet Revenge is a misadventure game about standing up to a school bully, having to find ways and means to sneak around and leave pineapples for her to discover in the most unlikely and intimate of spaces. I did some googling and apparently the original source is 4chan, so take that how you will, but it's about tormenting the bully by making them see pineapples everywhere in quite a literal manner, with a rather bizarre art style and very bold colours, which makes it stand out visually. I'm not condoning the actions either way, since some of these are crimes like trespassing and breaking into someone's home, but goes to show that inspiration can really come from anywhere. A stylish looking roguelite deck builder is Rune Coliseum, a gladiator combat title with some sick looking animations. You're using various skills and equipment and planning out your attacks in sequence while countering what the enemy plays, having the roguelite style procedural generation, choice of opponent, and even ability or card upgrades and unlocks, where gladiator themed games tend to do pretty well since there is an interest in them. I have no idea if this game is supposed to be an indie game or not, since it is from a technically independent company of about 30 ex-AAA developers who are making a co-op tactical survival horror game named The Forever Winter. One thing's for sure, it looks sleek as hell, where you and your crew have to loot the dead in order to survive under the shadow of gargantuan war machines, contrasting the weak everyday man with these powerful enemies, which results in a horror game-like tension. There seems to be some extraction shooter-like mechanics, since you are skulking about gathering resources and have to make it out of the mission alive in order to keep them, and with co-op support might be an interesting, maybe Remnant 2-like kind of experience and could be neat. A turn-based RPG with a fantastic art style is the Nameless Slay Dragon, a bit of a strange title, which might be due to translation issues, but this has you playing as a young man who has a blood feud with a dragon, who must gather allies, adventure to gather strength, and to eventually settle the score once and for all. Interestingly, the developer describes this as a game book adventure, possibly drawing upon those choose your own adventure books of old, where your choices will matter and there are multiple endings in this game. However, it is not all random, since there are more than 20 character classes and you can mix and match skills and abilities, along with an extensive crafting system and awesome art, making this one to watch. The developer of the puzzle maker Cebba's Odyssey did reach out, saying that it draws inspiration from Fire Emblem and Into the Breach, so of course I'm in, but it is not a turn-based tactics title, but rather a puzzle game instead. You're presented with various combat scenarios and have to move your units, use the environment and special attacks and abilities to defeat all enemies in a single sequence, looking quite polished and well made, with my favourite pixel art style as well, so fans of the genre, do give this a look. Warhammer games have been on fire as of late, with Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader from the developer of the Pathfinder CRPG games being another fantastic entry, who are releasing their first paid DLC titled Void Shadows this week. This adds about 15 hours of content with new missions and more lore, a new companion in a death cult assassin, more crew members, locations to explore, and a new threat to deal with, all seamlessly blended into the main campaign, which makes it even better. This week also sees the Steam release of Witchfire, which was previously an Epic Games Store exclusive, but do note that it is still an early access release and has not reached 1.0. Interestingly, it self-describes as a single-player RPG shooter, but has a roguelite or extraction shooter inspired structure where you can go on expeditions, fight and have to extract to retain loot collected. But if you feel powerful enough, you can take on the Witcher's Familiar to unlock new areas and powerful weapons. It looks freaking awesome and is from the people that made Painkiller and Bulletstorm, so I'm not surprised and is certainly a title of interest. We also have the release of Worlds of Aria this week, another attempt at a digital video game adaptation of a tabletop role-playing game. Think Dungeons & Dragons, for example, down to having the classic fantasy setting with bards, rogues and more. You are rolling dice to see the results in combat as well as in other situations, with a neat visual style as well, although similar games like Paladins have done just okay, so we'll see on this one. This one's for indie game developers. The free indie game marketing resources are ready, so sign up via the link in the description below to get it in your mailbox. What a week. However, there are still some huge titles to come, including Tiny Glade, an interactive toy more so than a game, which allows you to build little medieval dioramas without any explicit goals, points, scores or objectives. This genre, if you can call it that, was popularized by Townscaper, but the developers of Tiny Glade have taken the idea and run with it, adding lighting effects and even little interactions with environmental objects like sheep to give it just that much more polish. Needless to say, it looks absolutely gorgeous and appears to have some sort of photo mode as well, so you can tinker and wow away the time and get lost in this experience. And don't judge a book based on its cover, since this is one of the most wishlisted games on Steam. The next title from publisher Hooded Horse is titled Breachway from developer H-Flow Studio. Of note, since there's something special going on at that publisher, since it has been bangers only from them. This is a roguelite deck builder, but with a sci-fi twist where you are piloting a ship and seeking out a mysterious something only known as the Signal. While it looks like the indie classic FTL Faster Than Light, combat in this is straight up roguelite deck builder, so you are using cards to activate weapons, shields, boosters and more, but seems to have multiple types of resources to manage rather than just energy. Also having to manage your crew and their interpersonal relationships and alliances, and will be for fans of the genre.
Welcome to the Warzone, Commander.
We also have the 1.0 release of Mecha Bellum after about 1.5 years in early access, in which this auto-battler tactical war game looks gorgeous and is pretty fun. You are selecting and customizing units before battle and then placing them into your army, after which you strategically arrange them on the battlefield and hit go to watch the mayhem unfold. There are active elements during battle, like calling in an airstrike, with the sheer number of units on screen really being quite impressive and looks awesome as well. Here's another 1.0 release of interest in the dark fairy tale action roguelite Raven's Watch, a game which has been in early access since April 2023, where you play as fairy tale characters like Little Red Riding Hood, taking on classic monsters from said tales as well. It looks very stylish and comes to us from the developer of Curse of the Dead Gods, with some visual similarity, with the variety of playable characters being one of the highlights. The 1.0 release adds the final boss of the game in the Baba Yaga, as well as the 9th playable character, and looks to take its place among the greats in the genre. For a truly new release, we have this pixel art JRPG with life sim elements named Bloomtown A Different Story, a game which has been on my watchlist for quite a while since I do love the art, and not only that, the turn-based combat has monster taming elements as well. You play as little kids in a 1960s inspired Americana world in a small town, but something is not quite right and you and your friends have to fight demonic creatures that live within the hearts of its residents, also being able to capture them, which is where the monster taming part comes in. You can do life sim stuff like gardening or fishing in addition to the combat, all with an awesome look, and is, in part, from the developer of Graveyard Keeper, so of course I'm in. Watch this video for more pixel art indie games.